Welcome back, survivors. Today's confession comes from deep in the ruins of San Francisco, where the Shi Empire stands as one of the wasteland's most advanced and mysterious factions. Everyone knows the story of the Chinese submarine that washed ashore after the Great War. But what if that story is a carefully crafted lie hiding something far more disturbing? The truth about the Shi is darker than you imagine. Let's begin. They welcomed me with tea, green tea, served in salvaged pre-war porcelain that somehow survived 2 centuries of nuclear fire. The Shi have a way of making everything feel deliberate, controlled, like they're performing a ritual they've practiced for lifetimes. I should have known something was wrong the moment Ken Lee smiled at my questions. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I discovered in San Francisco and why I'm recording this. Confession before they find me. If you're hearing this, I'm probably already dead, dissolved in the bay, or worse, converted into one of their loyal citizens who knows too much to ever speak. The Shi claim their ancestors were simple submarine sailors who washed ashore after the Great War. Simple sailors. That's what they told me, what they tell everyone who asks. The Shih-huang-ti submarine ran aground during the nuclear exchange, and its crew, resourceful and desperate, stripped the metal from their vessel to build the steel palace. They salvaged the ship's mainframe, installed it in their fortress, and named it the Emperor. A heartwarming tale of survival against impossible odds. But simple sailors don't build eye-governed empires. Simple sailors don't develop technology that rivals the Brotherhood of Steel. Simple sailors don't manufacture H&K G11 assault rifles and M72 Gauss rifles from scratch in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I came to San Francisco 6 months ago, following rumors about advanced technology being traded through back channels. The wasteland is full of scavengers peddling pre-war junk, but the Shi were different. They weren't selling relics. They were selling newly manufactured weapons, restored T-51 power armor, synthesized fuel derived from plant extracts and sea life. That's not salvage. That's industrial capability. The steel palace itself should have been my first clue. The structure is small, reinforced, protected by guards carrying weapons that shouldn't exist outside of Brotherhood bunkers. The walls are submarine hull, yes, but arranged with military precision, defensive angles calculated for maximum coverage. This wasn't built by panicked sailors trying to survive. This was built by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Inside, past the guards and their Gauss rifles, sits the Emperor. The Shi call it their leader, though everyone knows the real power belongs to Ken Lee, the Emperor's head advisor. But that's the thing that bothered me from the start. Why would submarine mechanics need an AI advisor? Naval computers from 2077 weren't designed for governance. They calculated trajectories, managed reactor output, coordinated missile launches. The Shih-huang-ti was a ballistic missile submarine, nuclear capable, part of the People's Liberation Army Navy's strategic deterrent force. And according to every technical manual I've ever read, those vessels carried some of the most sophisticated computing systems China ever produced, not for running a fishing village, for coordinating nuclear strikes against enemy nations. So I started asking questions. Polite questions at first. How did submarine mechanics transition to advanced manufacturing? Where did they learn to synthesize fuel? How did they maintain such strict organizational discipline for over 2 centuries? The answers were always vague, wrapped in cultural explanations about Chinese perseverance and ancestral wisdom. But vagueness is a red flag in the wasteland. People with nothing to hide tell you everything. People with secrets tell you nothing wrapped in silk and ceremony. Then I met an old vagrant down at the docks. Called himself Rusty, claimed he'd been in San Francisco since before the Shi got powerful. He was drunk on homebrewed rotgut, the kind that makes you honest whether you want to be or not. I asked him what San Francisco was like when the Shi first showed up. He laughed, said it was the damnedest thing. One day there's just wreckage and radiation. Next day, there's Chinese folks building a fortress like they'd done it before. No trial and error, no learning curve. They knew how to organize labor, establish perimeters, create supply lines, military skills, not sailor skills. That's when I started noticing other things. The way Shi guards move. Their patrol patterns aren't random. They're textbook defensive deployment, rotating shifts with overlapping coverage, maintaining sight lines, controlling choke points. Someone trained them, someone who understood tactical operations, and their technology, the Shi, didn't just repair pre-war equipment. They reverse engineered it, improved it, manufactured new versions. That requires engineering knowledge far beyond what submarine crews would possess. It requires scientists, researchers, people with specialized training in advanced fields. Then there's their complete disinterest in China. That's what really made me suspicious. See, I'd encountered another Chinese submarine captain. Name was Zhao. Found his vessel, the Yangtze, stuck in Boston Harbor, 2,000 miles east of here. Zhao spent 200 years obsessing over one thing getting home to: China. Every conversation circled back to his homeland, his guilt about the missiles he launched, his dreams of rebuilding, his desperate hope that something remained of the country he remembered. That's what you'd expect from someone stranded far from home: homesickness, regret, a burning need to return. The Shi have none of that. Zero interest in the Chinese mainland, no expeditions planned, no attempts at communication, no wistful reminiscence about their ancestral homeland. They rebuilt Chinatown in San Francisco not from nostalgia, but from something that looked more like territorial marking. They weren't preserving culture, they were establishing presence. When I asked Ken Lee why the Shi never tried to return to China, he looked at me with those calm, calculating eyes and said some journeys are better left incomplete. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not sad, not wistful, satisfied, like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. That's when I started digging into pre-war intelligence. The Shi let me access some of their historical archives, probably thinking I'd find nothing useful. But I'm good at reading between lines, finding the details people try to hide. I found references to something called the Ghost Fleet. Pre-war American intelligence, specifically the Defense Intelligence Agency, had been tracking rumors of Chinese stealth submarines operating out of Shaanxi province. The reports were fragmentary, classified, buried in files that were never fully declassified before the bombs fell, but the pieces were there. According to an experimental AI called PAM at a facility called the Switchboard, Chinese stealth technology far exceeded American capabilities. PAM calculated a 91% probability that China was conducting large-scale stealth research. Two intelligence stations, A31 and B19, reported sightings of what they called the Ghost Fleet in November 2075. Stealth submarines, vessels that could penetrate American coastal defenses undetected, ships that combined natural submarine stealth with active camouflage technology, the same technology used in Chinese stealth armor. And here's where it gets interesting. Chinese stealth armor, formerly known as He Gui armor, Black Ghost armor, wasn't standard military issue. It was reserved for elite units, specifically the Crimson Dragoons and the Black Ghost counterinsurgency squads, special forces, commandos, not regular Navy personnel. The Crimson Dragoons were elite troops trained from birth for covert operations. They used stealth technology, officer swords, advanced firearms. They were deployed to the most sensitive locations, tasked with infiltration, sabotage, psychological warfare. The Black Ghost squads were even more specialized: counterinsurgency, terror operations, the kind of units you send when you need something done quietly, permanently, with no witnesses. Both units had access to stealth technology that made them nearly invisible, and the Shi, they have stealth technology, not just remnants, active, functional systems. I've seen it used during their security operations, brief flickers at the edge of vision, guards who weren't there a second ago suddenly appearing from nowhere. That's not equipment submarine sailors would carry. That's specialized military hardware reserved for China's most elite operatives. So I formed a theory that makes my hands shake as I record this. What if the Shih-huang-ti wasn't a random submarine that happened to wash ashore? What if it was part of the Ghost Fleet? What if it was a colonization vessel? China knew the war was coming. Hell, they helped start it. They launched the first missiles, after all. But what if some Chinese strategists looked at the inevitable nuclear exchange and made a calculation? What if they realized that regardless of who won, the Chinese mainland was finished? So, they deployed contingency plans. Elite operatives, highly trained, carrying advanced technology and specialized eye systems, with orders to establish permanent presence on American soil, not to fight, not to conquer in the traditional sense, to survive, to build, to wait. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just reconnaissance, it was invasion, but not the kind with armies and occupation, the subtle kind, the kind where you send your best people to survive the apocalypse and establish footholds in enemy territory. Think about it. The Shih-huang-ti arrives in San Francisco just as the bombs fall. Convenient timing. They beach the submarine, strip it for materials, and immediately begin building a fortified position in the ruins of Chinatown. Not random wandering, not desperate survival. Purposeful, organized construction. They salvage the Emperor Eye, which isn't just a navigation computer, but a sophisticated strategic analysis system capable of long-term planning and governance. Exactly what you'd need to guide a colonial operation over centuries. They maintain strict discipline, cultural cohesion, organizational hierarchy, the kind of structure you'd see in a military unit, following operational doctrine, not civilians desperately trying to survive. They develop advanced technology, manufacturing capabilities, research divisions, not slowly, not through trial and error, but systematically, like they had training, like they had specialists embedded in their population from the beginning. And they show no interest in returning to China because they were never meant to return. San Francisco was their mission objective all along. The Crimson Dragoons, the Black Ghost squads, elite operatives trained for long-term deployment. What if some of those units weren't just in Alaska fighting Americans? What if some were aboard submarines, headed for American coastal cities, carrying orders to survive the war and establish Chinese presence regardless of who launched the final missiles? The Shi aren't descended from submarine sailors. They're descended from infiltrators, special forces operatives carrying forward a mission their ancestors started 2 centuries ago. The Emperor isn't just helping them survive, it's still following directives programmed before the Great War. Directives about establishing strategic positions, developing technological superiority, preparing for eventual expansion. And the Ghost Fleet, those stealth submarines America never found? Maybe they never found them because the submarines were already exactly where China wanted them. Hidden in plain sight, disguised as refugees, waiting. I confronted Ken Lee 3 days ago. Didn't accuse him directly, just laid out the facts, the timeline, the technological inconsistencies. I asked him how submarine mechanics knew to fortify defensive positions, how they developed manufacturing capabilities, why they never tried to contact China. He listened patiently, poured more tea, smiled that same calm smile. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. He said, "Some secrets are better than truth because truth makes people ask dangerous questions." If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I left his office knowing I was being watched. Not obviously, the Shi are too sophisticated for obvious surveillance, but I felt eyes on me constantly, guards who happened to be everywhere I went, civilians who struck up friendly conversations that felt like interrogations. The spy network Ken Lee mentioned, the one that oversees everything happening in San Francisco, was focused entirely on me. That's when I started really digging. If I was already marked, I might as well find everything I could before they silenced me. I went back to the docks. Rusty was gone, not moved on, gone. His usual spot was empty, his belongings cleared out, no sign he'd ever been there. I asked around. Nobody remembered him, wouldn't talk, genuinely didn't remember, like he'd been erased from their collective memory. That's when I knew the Shi had methods I didn't understand, ways of making problems disappear that went beyond simple murder. So I got desperate. I broke into the Steel Palace archives at night. Don't ask me how. Let's just say the Shi aren't the only ones with skills in this wasteland. I found schematics, technical documents, maintenance logs from the Shih-huang-ti. The submarine was a Yangtze-class vessel, same class as Zhao's boat in Boston Harbor. But the Shih-huang-ti had modifications, additional compartments, expanded crew quarters, storage areas that didn't match standard naval architecture, and the crew manifest. That's what confirmed everything. Standard Yangtze-class submarines carried approximately 24 personnel, engineers, weapons officers, navigation specialists, military roles. The Shih-huang-ti manifest listed 68 people. 68, more than double the standard complement. And their specializations weren't just naval. There were materials, scientists, genetic researchers, agricultural specialists, computer engineers, urban planners. A complete cross-section of expertise you'd need to establish a self-sufficient colony. This wasn't a military crew. This was a colonization team disguised as a military crew. I photographed everything I could, stuffed the film in waterproof containers, hid them around San Francisco. If you're searching for proof after I'm gone, check the old cable car museum, third brick from the left on the left. North wall, 2 feet up from the floor. There's a hollow space. The film is there. But the manifest wasn't the most disturbing thing I found. There were mission parameters, encrypted but partially decoded by previous researchers who must have disappeared like Rusty. The fragments I could read were enough. Operation Designation Perpetual Dynasty. Objective: establish permanent Han presence in coastal urban centers. Priority survival and propagation regardless of mainland status. Authorization level Central Military Commission, Chairman Cheng direct approval. This wasn't a defensive operation. This wasn't about winning the war. This was about surviving the war and maintaining Chinese civilization on enemy soil after both civilizations destroyed each other. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just submarines. It was an ARC program, multiple vessels deployed to multiple American cities, each carrying specialists and advanced technology, each with the same mission: survive, establish, expand. San Francisco got the Shih-huang-ti. What about other coastal cities? Were there other Shi communities I didn't know about? Other groups descended from Ghost Fleet operatives, hiding their ghost origins behind survivor stories? I thought about Zhao again, his genuine homesickness, his desperate need to return to China, his guilt and regret, all the emotions you'd expect from someone who never wanted to leave home in the first place. The Shih-huang-ti crew had none of that, because they weren't sailors torn from home. They were volunteers, people who signed up for a one-way mission knowing they'd never see China again, knowing their children and grandchildren would grow up on American soil, accepting that as the cost of ensuring Chinese civilization survived the apocalypse. That's why the Shi maintain such strict cultural identity, not from nostalgia, from programming, from operational doctrine that says maintain cohesion, preserve knowledge, prepare for the long mission. And the Emperor, God, the Emperor. I found partial code from the I system. It wasn't just analyzing history and advising on policy. It was running probability matrices on population growth, resource acquisition, technological development, territorial expansion. It was planning not for the next year or the next decade, for the next 2 centuries. The Emperor was projecting the Shi population reaching critical mass around 2400. The year they'd have enough people, enough technology, enough influence to begin active expansion beyond San Francisco, not through military conquest, through economic integration, trade, technology sales, becoming indispensable to surrounding communities until absorption became inevitable. The Nixiar, the new California Republic, was mentioned in the projections. The Emperor calculated 73% probability of eventual Shi integration with or control of NCR territory through economic dependence, not war, assimilation, the long game, the patient game, the game that takes centuries to play. That's when I understood. The Ghost Fleet mission didn't end when the bombs fell. It's still ongoing. The Shi are still following their operational parameters 200 years later. The Emperor is still coordinating their long-term strategy, and every generation of Shi citizens is raised to continue the mission without even realizing they're part of an invasion that started before their great-great-great-grandparents were born. I found evidence of other facilities too, research stations outside San Francisco proper, bunkers in the surrounding hills, caches of equipment that predated the Shi's official settlement of the city, supplies staged before the Great War, waiting for the colonization teams to arrive and claim them. China prepared for this. They saw the nuclear exchange coming and deployed their contingency plans. Elite operatives, advanced technology, eye guidance systems, staged supplies, all designed to ensure Chinese civilization survived and thrived on American soil after both nations destroyed each other. The Crimson Dragoons weren't just combat troops. Some were, but others were the security detail for the colonization vessels, protecting the scientists and specialists who would rebuild civilization. The Black Ghost squads weren't just terror units. They were the intelligence apparatus, the spy network, the enforcers who would maintain operational security for centuries, and the stealth technology. That's what really clinched it for me. Stealth suits weren't standard submarine equipment. They were specialized gear for special operations forces. The fact that the Shi have access to stealth technology, that they can manufacture and maintain it too, centuries after the war, means they had specialists aboard the Shih-huang-ti who understood the technology intimately. Not sailors who found some suits. Engineers who designed the suits. I started mapping the Shi territory in San Francisco. Their official presence is centered on the Steel Palace and the surrounding blocks, but their actual influence extends much further. They have safe houses throughout the city, observer posts on high ground, supply caches in unexpected locations. The whole city is gridded with Shi infrastructure, invisible unless you're looking for it. Military, infrastructure, strategic placement, overlapping fields of observation and control. This is an occupied city. The occupation just happened so gradually, so carefully, that nobody noticed they were being occupied. The other factions in San Francisco don't see it. The hubologists are too focused on their cult nonsense to recognize what's happening. The Brotherhood of Steel maintains a presence, but they're observers, not controllers. The tanker vagrants on the PMV Valdez are too isolated to matter. None of them understand that San Francisco isn't a collection of survivor groups sharing space. It's a Chinese colonial city with some indigenous population that hasn't been absorbed yet. I talked to Dr. Sheng in the botany department. Sweet old woman, genuinely passionate about developing radiation-resistant plants. She showed me her work, vines that could consume radiation, cleanse entire city blocks, make the wasteland habitable again. Wonderful technology. Humanitarian application, except those vines could be deployed strategically. Clean radiation from territory you want to occupy. Leave it radioactive around territory you want to deny to enemies. Environmental warfare, conducted through agriculture. The kind of thinking that comes from military strategists, not botanists. Dr. Long Wang tried to develop super soldiers using FEV-derived serums, failed according to official records. But what if he didn't fail? What if he succeeded and the results were classified? What if the Shi have enhanced operatives and they're just smart enough not to deploy them where outsiders can see? Everything the Shi do has dual use. Civilian applications with military potential. Research that seems peaceful but could be weaponized instantly. A society structured for rapid conversion from peaceful development to total war if necessary. That's military doctrine. Defense in depth, dual-use technology, civilian infrastructure that can support military operations. All the hallmarks of a society built by people with strategic training. I found a reference to Ken Lee's background. He's not just the emperor's advisor. He's the 11th advisor since the Shi established themselves in San Francisco. 11th. That means there were 10 before him. 10 generations of advisors guiding the Shi according to the emperor's long-term planning. 10 generations of people maintaining operational security, keeping the truth hidden, ensuring each new generation of Shi citizens believes the survivor story instead of the infiltration reality. That's sophisticated psychological operations, controlling information across centuries, making your own descendants believe a cover story so thoroughly they'll defend it against outsiders asking dangerous questions. And it worked. The Shi believe their own mythology. Most of them, anyway. They genuinely think their ancestors were simple sailors who got lucky. They don't know about Operation Perpetual Dynasty, They don't know about the colonization mission. They don't know they're living components in a strategic plan that predates their births by 200 years. Only the advisors know. Only the emperor knows. And they keep it that way because a population that believes it's surviving is easier to manage than a population that knows it's invading. I wondered how many other secrets the Shi are hiding. What else is buried in those archives? What other operations are running beneath the surface of their peaceful research society facade? Then I found something that made everything else look trivial. The Shih-huang-ti wasn't alone. The manifest mentioned rendezvous coordinates with other Ghost Fleet vessels, other submarines carrying other colonization teams. I found references to ghost units 2, 5, 8, and 12. 4 other vessels, minimum, deployed to other locations. San Francisco was just one target, one colonial seed among many. Where are the others? Did they survive? Are there other Shi-equivalent societies scattered along the American coast, each maintaining their own cover stories, each following their own emperor's guidance, each slowly establishing Chinese presence in post-war America? What if the Ghost Fleet succeeded? What if China lost the war but won the aftermath? What if 200 years from now, 300 years from now, the descendants of Ghost Fleet colonists control the entire American coastline, and nobody even remembers they're continuing a mission that started before the Great War? That's the terrifying genius of it. You don't need to win the war, you just need to survive it. And if you survive it with purpose, with planning, with resources and guidance, you can shape the post-war world according to your pre-war objectives. The Shi are proof that some invasions don't end with the last bomb. They just wait. They build. They integrate. They become part of the landscape until nobody questions their presence anymore. And somewhere in San Francisco Bay, the wreckage of the Shih-huang-ti holds all the proof, the original orders, the complete crew manifest, the encryption keys that would unlock the Emperor's full operational parameters, everything that would expose the truth. I was planning to dive the wreck, recover the evidence, broadcast it across the wasteland before the Shi could stop me. Then I found the listening device in my room. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. The listening device was sophisticated, not wasteland tech, not even Brotherhood tech. Pre-war Chinese intelligence equipment, miniaturized, still functional after 2 centuries. They'd been monitoring me the entire time. Every conversation, every theory I'd developed, every piece of evidence I'd found. They knew everything. I left the device where it was, acted normal, kept my routine. But I started preparing, caching supplies, planning escape routes, recording this confession in segments, hiding each recording in a different location, because I realized something crucial. If they'd been listening the whole time and hadn't killed me yet, they wanted something. They were waiting for something. And I needed to figure out what before they decided I'd outlived my usefulness. That's when Ken Lee invited me to dinner. Not a summons, an invitation, polite, cordial, delivered by a Shi messenger who smiled like we were old friends. Dinner at the Steel Palace, private, quarters, just Ken Lee and myself. An honor, the messenger said. Very few outsiders receive such invitations. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew refusing would accelerate whatever timeline they were operating on. So I accepted, wore my best salvaged clothes, brought nothing that could be used as a weapon, walked into the Steel Palace like I was walking into my own execution. Ken Lee greeted me personally. His quarters were modest by pre-war standards, but luxurious for the wasteland. Books, real books, not photocopies or holotapes, art on the walls. Furniture that didn't look salvaged, but restored, carefully maintained across generations. The meal was exquisite. Fresh fish from the bay, vegetables from the Shi gardens, rice, actual rice, grown in their agricultural facilities, wine that tasted like it came from pre-war bottles, perfectly preserved. We made small talk. He asked about my background. I lied. He knew I was lying. We both pretended the lies were truth, a dance of deception between two people who understood exactly what game we were playing. Then, after the meal, he poured tea, the same green tea from my first visit, and he said something that changed everything. He said, "You've been asking the right questions, but you're drawing the wrong conclusions." I stayed silent, waited. He smiled again, that same calm smile that never reached his eyes. The Shih-huang-ti was indeed part of the Ghost Fleet, he said. Operation Perpetual Dynasty was real. The colonization mission happened exactly as I'd theorized. Everything I'd discovered was true, but I'd missed the most important part. The mission failed. He let that sink in, poured more tea, continued speaking in that measured, careful tone. The Ghost Fleet was deployed, he explained. Multiple submarines, multiple teams, multiple target cities, San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Diego, others. Each vessel carried specialists. Each had an Emperor-class AI. Each followed the same operational parameters. But the Great War disrupted everything. Nuclear strikes didn't just hit military targets. They hit coastal cities. They created tsunamis. They generated electromagnetic pulses that fried electronics. They destroyed harbors and irradiated coastlines. Most of the Ghost Fleet never made it to their target cities. They were sunk by naval mines, destroyed by coastal defense systems firing blindly in the chaos, caught in tsunamis generated by underwater detonations, or they simply ran aground in the wrong locations, their crews dying of radiation exposure before they could establish anything. The Shih-huang-ti got lucky. It made it to San Francisco, but barely. The submarine was damaged. The crew was exposed to lethal radiation levels, and they beached in a city that was actively burning from nuclear strikes. The colonization equipment destroyed in the beaching. The stage supply caches, most were in locations that no longer existed after the cache bombs fell. The carefully planned rendezvous points with other Ghost Fleet vessels, nobody showed up because everyone else was dead. The crew of the Shih-huang-ti found themselves in a nightmare. They were trained specialists, yes, elite operatives, absolutely. But they were stranded in a nuclear hellscape with failing equipment, no support, and no way to contact anyone who might help. They should have died. According to every probability matrix, every survival calculation, they should have died within weeks. They survived because they had one advantage: the Emperor. The Eye wasn't just a tactical computer. It was a learning system, adaptive. When the colonization mission collapsed, when all the careful planning became worthless, the Emperor recalculated. It analyzed the new reality. It developed new strategies. It guided the survivors through decisions that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Salvage the submarine, build fortifications, establish trade with other survivors, hide the military background, pretend to be simple sailors who got lucky. Maintain cultural cohesion, not from operational doctrine, but from genuine need for identity in a world that had destroyed their homeland. The Shi aren't continuing the invasion, Ken Li said. They're continuing the survival. The Emperor isn't following pre-war directives. It's creating new directives based on post-war realities. The long-term planning, the technological development, the strategic expansion, all of it comes from an eye trying to ensure its people don't just survive, but thrive in a world that killed everyone they knew. We're not infiltrators pretending to be refugees, he said. We're refugees who happen to have infiltrator training, and that training is the only reason we're still alive. I didn't believe him, said so directly. Asked why. If the mission failed, did they maintain such strict operational security? Why hide the Ghost Fleet connection? Why pretend to be something they're not? He looked at me like I was a child, asking why the sky is blue. Because, he said, people fear what they don't understand, and they destroy what they fear. The Shi aren't trusted as it is. They're too advanced, too organized, too different. If people knew the truth, that the Shi descended from a Chinese invasion force, that their ancestors were literally sent to occupy American soil, that they have military training and strategic planning capabilities, how long before some wasteland faction decides they're too dangerous to exist? The Brotherhood of Steel would see them as a technological threat. The NCR would see them as a foreign power. Random raider gangs would attack them for being outsiders. Every paranoid survivor with a gun and a grudge would have justification to kill them, so they maintain the story. Simple sailors who survived, lucky refugees who rebuilt, nothing threatening, nothing that requires elimination. It's not deception for conquest, Ken Li said. It's deception for survival. The same survival instinct that makes traders lie about where they got their goods. The same survival instinct that makes settlements hide their water sources. The same survival instinct that makes everyone in the wasteland pretend to be weaker than they are until they're strong enough to defend themselves. The Shi just do it better because they had better training. I asked about the stealth technology, the advanced weapons, the research capabilities that exceed most wasteland factions. He shrugged, said they had materials scientists on the Shih-huang-ti, computer engineers, weapons specialists. When you have expertise and discipline, you can accomplish things that look miraculous to people without either. The Brotherhood of Steel hoards pre-war technology, he said. The Shi recreate it. That's not evidence of an ongoing invasion. That's evidence of what happens when educated people work together for 200 years instead of fighting over scraps. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd found the crew manifest. Why 68 people? Why specialists instead of soldiers? If this was a military operation, why pack the submarine with scientists instead of combat troops? Ken Li's expression changed. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely sad. Because, he said, Chairman Cheng understood something the American leadership didn't. Nuclear war doesn't have winners. It only has survivors. And survivors need knowledge more than weapons. They need people who can grow food in irradiated soil, people who can purify water, people who can treat radiation sickness, people who can build generators and synthesize medicine and teach children mathematics. The Ghost Fleet wasn't an invasion force. It was a preservation project. China knew it was going to die. The question was whether Chinese knowledge, Chinese culture, Chinese civilization would die with it. So they sent arks, vessels full of specialists who could preserve and pass on everything worth saving. If they landed in America and found a world where America had won, They'd integrate quietly, become Chinese Americans, contribute to American society while preserving their heritage. If they landed in America and found mutual destruction, they'd survive independently, build new communities, preserve knowledge for future generations. Either way, Chinese civilization continues. That was the mission, not conquest, continuation. And the American leadership never understood that, Ken Lee said, because American thinking always assumed victory or defeat. Chinese thinking assumed survival. That's why China deployed the Ghost Fleet while America was still trying to win the war. I sat there processing this. Everything I discovered was real. The Ghost Fleet, the colonization mission, the elite operatives, the advanced technology, all of it true, but the interpretation, the meaning, the purpose, all of that was different from what I'd assumed. I asked Ken Lee why he was telling me this. Why reveal the truth after the Shi had spent 2 centuries hiding it? He smiled again, said, "Because you're going to tell people anyway. You've already hidden recordings all over San Francisco. You've already cached evidence. Even if we killed you tonight, your story would get out eventually. So I'm offering you a choice. Tell the story you've discovered, the conspiracy theory about ongoing invasion and hidden conquest. Watch as wasteland paranoia turns against the Shi. Watch as fear and suspicion undo 200 years of careful building. Watch as people who survive the apocalypse get destroyed by post-apocalyptic politics. Or tell the truth, that the Shi descended from people who tried to preserve civilization, that they've spent 2 centuries doing exactly what every other survivor community has done, just more successfully, that their secrecy comes from fear, not from conspiracy, that they're not invaders, they're refugees with skills. Either story is believable," he said. "Either story has evidence. The question is which story creates a better future for everyone in the wasteland." I asked what happens if I choose the first story, if I tell people the Shi are a hidden invasion force. He sipped his tea, said, "Then we'll defend ourselves. We have the technology, we have the training, we have 200 years of preparation. We'll survive whatever comes, just like we survived the Great War. But a lot of other people won't, and the wasteland will lose one of its few functioning sources of advanced technology and peaceful trade. Everyone loses except the fear and paranoia." Then he asked me a question that I'm still thinking about as I record this. He asked, "What do you think makes someone a threat? Their capabilities or their intentions?" Because the Shi have capabilities, advanced technology, military training, strategic planning, all the tools necessary for conquest if they wanted conquest. But in 200 years, they've never invaded anyone. They've traded, they've researched, they've kept to themselves mostly. They've sold technology to people who needed it. They've developed radiation cleansing plants to help restore the wasteland. Their capabilities say they could be dangerous. Their actions say they're not. So which matters more? What people can do or what people actually do? I didn't have an answer. Still don't. Ken Lee walked me to the door, said I had 1 week to decide what story I wanted to tell. Said the Shi would respect whatever decision I made, but I should think carefully about the consequences. Then he said something that haunts me. He said, "The Great War happened because people stopped believing in shared futures. Everyone assumed their survival required someone else's destruction. That's how you get nuclear annihilation. By forgetting that we all live on the same planet, breathe the same air, need the same resources. The Shi survived because they remembered that. They helped other survivors. They traded fairly. They shared knowledge, not from altruism, from practical recognition that their survival was tied to everyone else's survival. That's not invasion strategy, he said. That's civilization strategy. And maybe that's what the wasteland needs more of. I left the Steel Palace more confused than when I entered. I came looking for proof of conspiracy. I found proof of conspiracy, but I also found alternative explanations that made equal sense. The evidence doesn't change. The crew manifest still lists 68 specialists. The mission parameters still reference Operation Perpetual Dynasty. The Emperor still runs probability matrices on long-term expansion. The Shi still maintain operational security and cultural cohesion, but the meaning changes depending on interpretation. Are they invaders following ancient directives, or are they survivors using whatever advantages they inherited to build something better than the wasteland normally allows? I've been thinking about Zhao again, his guilt about the missiles he launched, his desperate need to return home, his isolation and regret. The Shi don't have that guilt because they never launched missiles at anyone. They don't have that isolation because they built a community. They don't have that regret because they helped rebuild instead of destroy. Maybe that's the difference between military crew following war orders and colonization crew following survival orders. One destroys and regrets, the other builds and perseveres. Or maybe I'm being manipulated. Maybe Ken Lee's entire story is psychological operations. Maybe he fed me just enough truth mixed with just enough misdirection to make me doubt my own conclusions. That's the problem with intelligence work. Once you know people are capable of deception, you start seeing deception everywhere. You can't trust your own observations because you know observations can be staged. You can't trust your own reasoning because you know reasoning can be manipulated. So I'm recording everything, both versions, the invasion theory and the survival theory, the conspiracy interpretation and the humanitarian interpretation, all the evidence I found and all the explanations Ken Lee offered, because maybe the truth is somewhere between them. Maybe the Ghost Fleet was both, an invasion that became a preservation project when the war made invasion impossible, a colonization mission that transformed into a survival mission when colonization became meaningless. Maybe the Shi are both invaders and refugees, both dangerous and peaceful, both following ancient directives and creating new purposes. Maybe that's what survival looks like in the wasteland, contradictory, complicated, not easily categorized as good or evil, threat or friend, truth or deception. I've spent the last 6 days thinking about Ken Lee's question: what makes someone a threat, capabilities or intentions? The wasteland is full of people with dangerous capabilities. The Brotherhood of Steel has power armor and energy weapons. The Enclave had vertibirds and advanced technology. Raiders have guns and numbers. Everyone has something that could be used to hurt others. But we don't eliminate groups based on what they could do. We judge them based on what they actually do. Except when we don't. Except when fear overrides reason. Except when suspicion becomes justification for preemptive violence. I've seen it happen. Communities destroyed because someone thought they might be dangerous. People killed because they seemed too different. Technology destroyed because ignorance feared what it didn't understand. The wasteland runs on fear more than it runs on reason, and fear makes terrible decisions. So here's what I've decided. I'm going to tell you everything. The invasion theory, the survival theory, all the evidence, all the interpretations, and you can decide what it means. Because maybe that's the point. Maybe there is no single truth. Maybe the Shi are whatever we collectively decide they are, based on how we choose to interpret their existence. I went back to the docks one more time. Wanted to see if Rusty had returned. He hadn't. But I found someone else. An old Shi woman. Must have been 90 if she was a day. Sitting on a crate watching the bay. I sat next to her. Asked if she'd been in San Francisco long. She laughed. Said she'd been born here. Her grandmother was one of the original crew from the Shih-huang-ti. She'd heard the stories passed down through 3 generations. I asked what her grandmother told her about the submarine's arrival. The old woman looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Said her grandmother never talked about it much. Too painful. Too many friends dead. Too much radiation sickness. Too much chaos. But one thing her grandmother always said, she said they came to America expecting to die. The mission was suicide. Everyone aboard the Shih-huang-ti knew it. China was finished. America was finished. The world was finished. They were just trying to make sure some small piece of human knowledge survived the ending. They didn't expect to build an empire. They expected to die teaching children how to read, how to purify water, how to grow food, passing on whatever they could before radiation or violence or starvation took them. The fact that they survived was the miracle. The fact that they prospered was impossible. Every day the Shi exist is a day nobody thought they'd see. So when outsiders come asking why they're so secretive, why they maintain such discipline, why they seem so organized, the answer is simple. Because loosening up means dying. Because chaos means extinction. Because the only reason they're still alive is because they never stopped being careful. That's not invasion mentality, the old woman said. That's survivor mentality. The mentality of people who know how close death always is and refuse to give it an opening. I asked if she knew about the Ghost Fleet, about Operation Perpetual Dynasty, about the colonization mission. She smiled, said of course. Everyone in the Shi leadership knows. It's not hidden from them. It's just not discussed with outsiders because outsiders wouldn't understand. You want to call it invasion? She said. Go ahead. You want to call it preservation? That works too. Words don't change what happened. Chinese people came to American shores trying to survive. They survived. Now their descendants are here contributing to wasteland civilization same as everyone else. Does it matter what their ancestors intended 200 years ago? Does it matter what China wanted before China stopped existing? She asked me if I blamed the children of raiders for their parents' crimes, if I held vault dwellers responsible for vault tech's experiments, if I thought Brotherhood scribes should die for the sins of the old world they're trying to preserve. Everyone in the wasteland descended from someone who did something terrible. Pre-war America wasn't innocent. Pre-war China wasn't innocent. Pre-war anyone wasn't innocent. That's why the world burned. But we're not our ancestors. We're people trying to survive in the world they left us. Judging each other based on genetics and heritage instead of actions and choices, that's how you get more wars. That's how you repeat history instead of learning from it. I sat there, watching the waves, thinking about all the evidence I'd gathered, all the conclusions I'd drawn, all the fear I'd built up about the Shi being a hidden threat. And I realized something. The threat wasn't the Shi. The threat was my own suspicion, my willingness to see conspiracy where there might just be competence, my readiness to assume malice where there might just be caution. The old woman stood up, patted my shoulder, said, "Tell whatever story you want. The Shi will still be here tomorrow, still trading, still researching, still surviving. Stories don't change reality, They just change how people react to reality. And sometimes those reactions cause more damage than the reality ever would. She walked away, left me sitting there with all my evidence and all my theories and no certainty about any of it. So here's what I know for certain. Facts, verifiable, documented. The Shih-huang-ti was a Chinese submarine that beached in San Francisco after the Great War. It carried 68 people with specialized skills. Those people established a community that became the Shi. They salvaged their submarine's eye and used it to guide their development. They maintained Chinese cultural identity while adapting to wasteland realities. They developed advanced technology through combination of inherited knowledge and 2 centuries of research. They maintain strict operational security and don't discuss their origins with outsiders. All true, all documented, all verifiable. Here's what I believe but can't prove. Interpretations, theories, possibilities. The Shih-huang-ti was part of a Chinese ghost fleet deployment. The crew were elite operatives, not standard sailors. They were sent to establish Chinese presence on American soil as part of a long-term strategic operation. They had pre-positioned supplies and sophisticated planning. They were trained for colonization and infiltration, also probably true, also supported by evidence, also reasonable interpretation of the facts. But here's where interpretation becomes critical. Were they invaders or preservers, threats or survivors, enemies continuing a dead war or refugees building a new civilization? The evidence supports both interpretations. The crew manifest shows colonization planning. It also shows survival preparation. The Emperor runs expansion matrices. It also runs sustainability calculations. The Shi maintain military discipline. They also maintain peaceful trade relations. Every piece of evidence has multiple explanations. Every fact supports multiple narratives. So which narrative matters? The one about invasion that makes them dangerous? Or the one about survival that makes them admirable? I think both are true. I think the Ghost Fleet was absolutely an invasion project. I think China deployed elite teams to establish presence on American soil. I think Operation Perpetual Dynasty was real strategic planning for long-term occupation. I also think the Great War made all of that irrelevant. I think the mission failed, not because the team failed, but because the world that issued the mission stopped existing. I think the Shih-huang-ti crew found themselves following orders from a nation that no longer existed to prosecute a war that no longer mattered in a world that had moved beyond such concerns. And I think they adapted. I think they took their training and their knowledge and their discipline and applied it to the new reality. I think they became something their original mission never intended. Not invaders, not even refugees. Survivors who happen to have advantages most survivors don't. The question isn't whether the Shi descended from an invasion force. They did. The question is whether that matters 200 years later, when everyone who issued those orders is dead and ended 5. Everyone who received those orders is dead, and the only people left are descendants trying to live their lives. I've decided it doesn't matter, or rather, it matters less than what the Shi actually do. And what they actually do is trade fairly, develop useful technology, help clean radiation from the wasteland, and maintain stability in San Francisco. Those actions matter more than ancient intentions. But I'm also going to tell the full truth, because people deserve to know the full truth. The Shi did descend from a Ghost Fleet colonization mission. That's historical fact. What people do with that fact is up to them. If they choose fear and violence, the wasteland gets uglier. If they choose understanding and cooperation, maybe we all survive a little longer. I went back to the Steel Palace yesterday, told Ken Lee my decision, said I